This is Dan Schneider, and on this Dan Schneider video interview, I will be talking with three experts on the life and career of Woody Allen in film. They are Vincent Brooke, Peter Bailey, and Alex Sherrimet, and this will begin once we return. All right, let's jump into the heart of the matter, and I'm going to go from left to right and talk with the panelists. So, Vincent Brooke, uh, I know that you have been a Woody Allen fan and expert for quite some time. So, if you could tell the viewers out there a little bit about yourself, your film expertise, your interest in cinema, and in Woody Allen specifically.
Okay, well, I'm a former film editor, aspiring screenwriter, but career has essentially been in the academic world as a professor at UCLA. I've taught at USC. I teach at a number of other institutions here in Los Angeles, Cal State LA, and Pierce College. I've written, I'm on my seventh book now. 2 books ago was a co-edited anthology on Woody Allen called Woody on Rye, Jewishness in the Films and Plays of Woody Allen. Peter Bailey was nice enough to contribute an excellent piece to that volume. My interest in Woody Allen, I would say, begins not from an academic perspective. I just simply enjoy his films early on. My wife and me together, we both fell in love together around the time of Annie Hall and key film together for a number of years. As we'll get into later on, there's been a parting of the ways between my wife and me regarding Woody Allen. In fact, she half-jokingly said she was going to boycott my book signings of my recent book. We'll get into how there's been gender gap, especially in regards to Woody Allen since the fall, so to speak, or since the scandal gap later. But then I only became more specifically interested in him in writing the book or editing the book and writing about him for the book.
What is the name of your Woody Allen book?
Okay, I said it before, but I'll repeat it gladly. Woody on Rye, Jewishness in the Films and Plays of Woody Allen. So obviously, I'm in that text coming to Woody Allen from a specifically Jewish perspective. And I think since then, I've tended to look at him from that perspective, as well as from the perspective of the scandal, as we'll get into later. I see the scandal continuing to affect his work in conscious and unconscious ways.
Now, I noticed you had other books based with a Jewish slanted theme. Is are you someone who grew up? Where did you grow up? Did you grow up like in the Borscht Belt, or what is this interest in Judaic humor and art?
I grew up as a valley boy in Van Nuys, California.
Okay.
My parents, however, are German Jewish refugees who arrived here on Kristallnacht,
Ah.
1948. So I'm a semi-child of the Holocaust, and grew up not in a terribly religiously observant household. Went to Hebrew school, got bar mitzvah. Did not consider myself religiously either a religious or observant Jew, but a very self-conscious Jew. And so that certainly informed my interest in Woody Allen from that perspective.
Okay. Thank you. Peter Bailey, you also have written a book. I'm looking at it on my desktop, The Reluctant Film Art of Woody Allen. Could you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself personally, your interest in film and Woody Allen specifically?
Okay. This is me.
Yes.
This is Peter.
Can you tell us a little bit about your interest in Woody Allen and film?
Yes. It started one summer when I had sciatica and couldn't get off the floor and could no longer read the way I would normally read. So I started watching movies and started watching Woody Allen movies. And this gradually developed into what I thought was an essay, which then developed into the book Reluctant Film Art of Woody Allen, which was published by the University of Kentucky Press in 2000. They're going to publish publish a second edition of it in 2016, which will include the movies from 2000 to up to Irrational Man. The argument in the Woody Allen book is basically that he has this great ambivalence towards the movies he makes. He couldn't stand to live without making them, but doesn't have the kind of enthusiasm you would think that somebody who made 50 movies in the last 50 years would have. So I tried to emphasize, it's a kind of thematically based book that emphasizes that element.
Okay. So let me turn to Alex Sherrimet then. Alex, you have a book called Woody Allen Reel to Reel. It's an e-book that came out last year. If you could tell the viewers a little bit about yourself as well.
I first became interested in film in my early 20s, sort of as a means to push myself. At that point, I was interested in writing stories and poetry and poetic criticism, but I was using film as a means of kind of escaping my comfort zone. So I got into his films pretty early on, and a couple years ago I was approached by a publisher to do this book on Woody Allen, and I agreed, and I decided to take strictly an art-first approach. So I've read many books on Woody Allen, many books on his films, but there hasn't been enough purely artistic analysis of what was on. There hasn't been enough analysis to see characters and whether or not such things work towards an artistic end. There hasn't been enough bottom line evaluation. So the book is basically a means of looking at all the films from start to finish, evaluating them as good or bad and why, and responding to all the criticism that he's received over the past 50 years, focusing on people like Paul McHale, John Rosenbaum, Roger Ebert, and others. So as far as I know, it is the biggest book on Woody Allen ever written, and it's going to be updated every year with new essays. So this year it's going to be updated with a couple of essays, including an article on Irrational Man. Next year, if his TV series actually takes off, there's going to be more content added to that. Beyond film criticism, I'm also generally a writer and poet, so I've written a couple of novels. On Monday, I'm starting my third novel. So in between that, I do criticism, fiction, among other things.
All right. Let's turn to Woody Allen before he got famous. Now, he was born, I know, in late 35, and in the 1950s, he wrote for, I believe, Sid Caesar. Do any of you, like maybe Vincent, do you, let me turn to Vincent, I guess, because since we're talking about Jewish humor, let's talk about Woody Allen in the 50s and how he got his start in show business before he became an actor and a stand-up comedian and then later a filmmaker. Vincent, can you just enlighten some of the viewers out there who may not really know that much about Woody Allen, a little bit about his background?
Okay, I don't know if I'm an expert in this biography, or something, but I know that he was a prodigy from a very early age, writing jokes, appearing in professional music, magic, his magician early on as well. And I'm not exactly sure what happened in the interim before his meet between the Sid Caesar show, where he eventually writing Mel's Simon, Larry Kilbar, others. Then he moved to stand-up comedy, and was very successful. Star of the comedy circuit for years. I don't know, I'm jumping over something. Peter maybe wants to fill in. But he started writing plays, actually, before he started writing short stories as well. Simply prolific, absolutely prodigious creator beginning, kind of obsessiveness, which he continues. Not only making film years, but still writing plays and performing, as you know, as a clarinetist. I don't know when he began that. He certainly learned in his childhood. But, you know, he's a quasi-professional clarinetist who appeared just in L.A. now. He's a tremendous hit here in L.A. And, as you know, went on the Revolution tour. There was a documentary about his Dixie band. Performing in, again, obsessively every like
Peter Bailey, do you have any comments about Woody Allen's pre-Hollywood life as a comedian or a gag writer?
I would reinforce what David said. There's a long period, well, not so long really, I guess. There was a period when he was writing gags for Wilson and other columnists would take his jokes and put them in the newspaper and say Woody Allen was talking to Tuddy somebody and Tuddy said this, Woody said that, and it was quite an apprenticeship for him. And after a bit, he actually started making about $50 a joke, and started to gain some confidence in joke writing, despite the fact that he was scared to death about performing jokes by himself, and finally needed to go to, any of us remember the name of the colony and the Catskills that he performed in first. It's referenced in Broadway Danny Rose. Anyway, he finally started performing his own material, which retrospectively he has very little respect for, because he thought he described himself as a tumbler, which is a word that I. Somebody whose jokes weren't about anything; they were just jokes. And after he started making movies, then back to the Woody Allen, tell a joke and then tell another joke and then tell another joke.
Okay, Alex, do you have any comments about the pre-Hollywood Woody Allen?
Not so much factual, but I do have a couple of anecdotes that I personally identified with for a number of reasons. So as Woody Allen was growing up in Brooklyn, he does talk about feeling pretty insecure at the time. I mean, he had, I guess, a few interests in comedy, he would go to movies, but by the time that he became 19 or 20, he sort of entered the Manhattan life, and he sort of entered this kind of really new society. He had no familiarity with, either social or intellectual. He said that he started reading books. He started reading philosophy. He started reading the classics in general. And he said that he began doing so as a means of basically keeping up with the people that he got to know, people that sort of started coming into the circle, and also to keep up with the women that he was meeting. He wanted to be interesting. And I identify with that because when I first started reading, when I first started getting into the arts, it was also a defense mechanism. It was a means of being able to differentiate myself from other people. But the one good thing about Woody is he didn't simply stick with it as an egotistical urge. He was able to sublimate that into saying, look, I had, some personal reasons for going into the arts and reading, but I started really enjoying it after a while. So he went from having a kind of a purely egotistical reason for, entering this kind of world to sort of saying, there's an importance here that goes beyond me. There are things here that, not only touch me, but touch the cosmos at large, and I want to explore that. And I think any artist that needs, that eventually becomes great, there is this moment of maturity. You can't simply always do it for yourself. A lot of people say, I make art for me, or I write for myself. It's not really art. There needs to be a communication at large with the world. The second part that has always stuck out for me was when he was in California, he was sort of seeing what the kind of work ethic that the comics over there had, and also some in New York. He would always ask them, so what material did you work on today, or what are you going to do tomorrow, or what is your writing schedule for the next month? And he said that every single time that he would speak with any one of his French colleagues, they always seemed to have an excuse for not doing work. They always had an excuse for not writing jokes, for not coming up with material, for not reading. Basically, they always had a reason to be lazy. And he told himself, wow, the only thing I have to do to get ahead of everybody around me is to simply work. And I think this applies to writing books. I think this applies to lots of things. I mean, if you really get down to it and you get up in the morning and you do the writing, and after a few months or a year, you're going to have a new book. After a few days or you're going to have a new essay. You do the work, things are going to get done. And I think instead of Woody Allen being treated as somebody that's prolific for the sake of trying to do as much as possible, I think it's simply the way he works. He could essentially work for only a few months a year and still have a film, and that's because he just works for those few months. And that's something that people really need to recognize and kind of learn how to apply to their own lives and things that go even beyond art. I think it's a lesson that's very much worth knowing.
All right. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Notes here?
Go ahead, Vincent.
Yeah, I think a couple of biographical elements that are important for the future discussion about his work is that you mentioned Jewishness, and he grew up in an Orthodox Jewish household. I think that's crucial to understand. He rejected that. Religious too, but it's not as well. The other is that he went to NYU, University, and either dropped out or was suspended. Maybe there was a technical aspect there, and that plays a role both in his attitude towards academia, which is very derogatory, much up through and it's actually mentioned in some ways that tie into his own biography in a couple of films. So I just want to bring up those.
All right, Peter, do you have a final comment? Do you have a final comment, Peter?
My only comment is that I'm not going to be able to comment on what my colleagues are saying because I'm not hearing most of it. If you're getting us, I guess that's okay, but there's not going to be much back and forth between me and Vincent and Alex because I can't really make out what they're saying.
All right, let's end this segment then, and we'll in our next segment we'll talk about the first decade or so of Woody Allen film from the mid-'60s to the mid-'70s, and we'll do that in a moment. This is Dan Schneider, and we had to let Peter Baylor go. We were just having too many audio and visual technical problems. So the rest of the show will be with Vincent Brook and Alex Sherriman. So in this segment, I wanted to talk about the first decade or so of the Allen career, his 1960s entree into film with films like What's New Pussycat, Casino Royale, and the sort of wacky, over-the-top films. So let me just start with Alex, since you did film by film, and then I can have Vincent comment. Let's talk about the early filmic career of Allen. So if you would start how he got into film and his first 2 or 3 films.
So he did some work as a writer and actor in films like What's New Pussycat, Casino Royale. He wasn't credited as a writer, but I think it's fairly obvious when you look at the lines that he delivers in his small part that he probably had some hand in constructing that. But his first kind of his own thing was What's New, Tiger Lily. It's basically it's a conglomeration of footage from a Japanese spy film that I guess wasn't doing very well. They got the rights to it. They kind of reorganized it, dubbed it over, and Woody Allen sort of introduces this. And it's ironic because although it's a pretty silly film, it's a pretty kind of thing that he doesn't take very seriously right now. It is pretty much the start of the kind of faux documentaries and mockumentaries that he would go on to later. As innovative as Zelig or a great film that has these overtones of documentary with Husbands and Wives, or later on Sweet and Lowdown. It really was the start of this kind of experimentation. His first official film as just fully credited as himself and something that he feels fully responsible for was Take the Money and Run. And it's, I guess you could call it as the film that begins with the kind of typical Woody Allen gags that would kind of go on for the rest of his career. You had fairly thin characters who were just there for purely for the gag effect. You
you have these sort of vignettes that eventually coalesce into a kind of a pretty loose narrative. You have a very kind of surprising twist ending in the last 30 seconds of the film that, despite the lightness of the film in general, I think you can make an argument that there's enough moments like that where there's kind of glimmers of something that would happen eventually in the future, something greater, something deeper. But to me, the most interesting films during this time period are probably the ones that were either neglected or just talked about in the wrong way. I don't think people really get Woody Allen as the comic in the wrong way. I mean, if you look at films like Take the Money and Run or Love and Death, Sleeper, people tend to have a pretty good appreciation for it. They sort of understand why it works or perhaps why some parts don't work. And that's because they are just purely gag-driven films. I feel like something like that is very visceral. People tend to understand it right away. Critics sort of get it. Fans rather get it pretty quickly. But when you look at some of his appearances in Casino Royale or his lead in the more writ film, The Front, that's when things sort of tend to go a little bit south. The Front was a film that, although Woody Allen didn't write it, I think most people that are looking at it now, they sort of consider it a little bit like a Woody Allen film. And it's very much been savaged for not being serious enough. People look at it, they want it to be a kind of expose on McCarthyism. They want it to be a very kind of deep political statement. They want it to be something that's very kind of hard-hitting in that sense. But despite what people's desires are for the film and historically what people have expected of, I guess, political movies, the fact is, even if it's not the overt kind of political film that they expected, it has values in a completely different direction. It's a very powerful character study. If you look at the kinds of changes that a character like Howard, who's played by Woody Allen, goes through, or you look at the sort of disease that's present within the Zero Mostel character, Hecky Brown, you start noticing that this is very much a character study. It's simply using politics as a means of exploring psychological depth. And when you interpret things that way, when you sort of look at a film for what it is rather than what you wish it to be, a whole world of possibilities opens up. You could start really interpreting things as they are. You could start looking at the screen and you start noticing all these little details. I think probably the best moment in the film is near the end when Hecky Brown decides that after he's done giving up his friends, after he's done sort of these things that go against his inner nature, he decides to kill himself. And it's done in a very kind of calm way where he goes into this hotel room. He kind of almost ritualistically calls over Howard. He takes a drink and then he just very suddenly opens up the window as if he's about to get fresh air, as if he's finally calm for the first time in a long time in his life. And instead of sort of taking in the night, he literally just jumps out and he dies. And I think you sort of see that bubbling up from the beginning in this character. You see this disease that probably has affected him his entire life. He probably had something within him that would, be liable in creating this kind of behavior from him, but it was never able to come out because he's had a very kind of a plush life. He's had good acting parts, he's had some money, he's had some fame. People sort of liked him. And now when he's sort of at the bottom, this is the kind of person that he becomes. And it's a very kind of subtle change, and you start noticing the little details, and eventually it explodes in this way. Again, the film is a character study. It's not something that should be treated as something purely political when it's not. And when you interpret it in that way, you see, again, all of these possibilities open up. So those are my comments. I'd like to know if anybody has anything to say about Casino Royale or maybe something else about The Front, because I feel like out of that period, those two are probably the most controversial pieces of work that he's done up until, I guess, Annie Hall or Interiors.
Vincent, what are your comments regarding the first decade or so of Woody Allen's filmic career? And then if you could follow up on commenting on either the two films, Casino Royale or The Front, that Alex had mentioned.
Okay, yes, I have much to say about that period. It's when he develops his persona as the Schlemiel, and I'm going to be unavoidably bringing up Jewish elements in Woody Allen's work. That's been my orientation, but I think it screams out to be looked at from that perspective. He was very lucky, actually. The timing was just right for Jewish performers to emerge as openly Jewish. This was not the case for decades in Hollywood, when they had to hide their Jewishness, change their names, change their noses, etc. Woody Allen, to quote, paraphrase a line of Seth Rogen's in Funny People by Judd Apatow, his face was circumcised. I mean, he was unmistakably Jewish. He changed his name, yes, but it was still recognizably Jewish. Now, it's not crucial that he overtly expressed that. I think it went without saying that he's openly Jewish. Now, I said he was lucky because this was a period when Jews were coming out Jewish. Barbara Streisand, a whole slew of them, Dustin Hoffman, Mel Brooks himself, George Siegel, Gene Wilder, Richard Benjamin, a whole slew of them. It's a revolutionary period in Jewish representation. It's undeniable. I'm not the first person to point that out. So he comes to the fore with that and develops his own persona as a New York Jewish Schlemiel, New York neurotic Jewish Schlemiel, as he was called. Okay, he had already developed this in his stand-up routines, and now he emerges in these films and develops it further. It isn't quite yet a one-to-one representation with his life, or not one-to-one, it was never one-to-one, but a connection with his own life would come to the fore, of course, in Annie Hall, which we'll get to later. But it's starting to sort of converge from just this very comical figure into someone that is closer to Woody Allen, the person. Okay, I'd like to go to the front. I'm glad that Alex talked about that, and I'm glad that he respects that film. It's one of my favorite films. Now, it is partly a Martin Ritt film. It's partly a Walter Bernstein film, who wrote the film, and many of the figures in it, it's about the blacklist, and many of the figures in it had experienced the blacklist. Woody Allen did not. But I agree that the lines in it, that the dialogue seems to be very Woody Allenish, and I'm sure he ad-libbed or brought in his own work into the piece. Now, the fact that I think it's importantly a political piece, I think it's one of the best films about the blacklist, but it is also a character study, but it's also about anti-Semitism, and Jewishness plays a strong role in it. The Hecky Brown character, crucially towards the end, when Woody Allen's character appears before this mock HUAC investigative committee, they keep saying Hecky Brown, or as he was really known as, Herschel Brownstein. And there's a prominent moment between Hecky Brown and Woody Allen's character where Woody Allen says, "It's okay to change your name. There's no big deal about that." Now, the irony there is, of course, Woody Allen himself changed his name. Okay, and if we go to that scene, that crucial scene that Alex pointed out, the wonderful scene wonderful, maybe isn't the right word because it's about suicide, but it's cinematically simply brilliant. It's a long take, and there is use of off-screen space. And I would argue that Woody Allen, in his later cinematic career, that he did not direct this film, was influenced by that, because we will see that long takes and off-screen space are two of the most characteristic aspects of his work from an aesthetic standpoint, which have not appeared in his work prior to this. He had directed some films before this. We will see it emerge after this. And I think he learned from this experience with Martin Ritt on the front.
Does Vincent, Vincent, can I just ask, in that scene, I believe Mostel leaves the camera behind, and then the camera pans over and we see the open window, so we're concluded. That reminds me of the scene in Taxi Driver, Martin Scorsese, when Robert De Niro has taken, what's her name, the female character to a porno film, and then he's calling her on the phone and the camera pans away. The camera doesn't want us to see the actual... Oh.
The actual event. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, of course, it was much more powerful, to just hear that whooshing sound as Hecky Brown's character jumps out the window. We just hear that whoosh, and then we pan across to the empty window. It's just tremendously effective and moving. And I would argue against the notion, and I think Alex was hinting at that, it's not a comedy. It's a very dark comedy, and another aspect of the brilliance of it is it starts kind of light, and Woody Allen's one-liners and so on permeate the film, and it gets darker as we go along. It begins to get dark as Hecky Brown goes to the Catskills and has a very unfortunate incident there, almost gets in a fight with someone, and the anti-communist aspect comes to the fore. And then, of course, he commits suicide. I mean, you don't have people die in comedies generally. It's a very dark satire, and it ends on somewhat of a light note with Woody Allen, becoming somewhat of his heroic figure and standing up to HUAC. But I think it's just a brilliant film. And my argument is that Woody Allen learned from it as a filmmaker, and his Schlemilish character was again further developed in it. Now let me bring out a key line towards in the middle part where he starts a relationship with a politically conscious woman who loses her job because she stands up against the blacklist. Can't think of her name now, as an actress, Markovici. Anyway, at some point they break up because she wants to become more radically political, and Woody Allen's character is more interested in his career at that point, doesn't want to jeopardize it by coming out politically. And she says at that moment, and this is really key to what will happen, it's really prescient of what will happen to him after the scandal. She says, "This has been a mistake of mine, not confusing the artist with the man. And I want you to know that I still respect the artist." That could be said for many critics and people after the scandal. They still respect him as an artist, not as much as a man.
Yeah. Let me just go back to Casino Royale, because I know I've talked with Alex of this before, and I think that's a film that's kind of unfairly maligned as one of these sort of over-the-top 60s extravaganzas, like It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, or the What's New Pussycat, or some of the British kind of super comedies that Peter Sellers had already started. I would argue that while it's not by any means a great film cinematically, though, I think it's a far more funny film than a lot of those other films that I mentioned, with the exception of It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. But I would say, other than Goldfinger, it's probably the best James Bond film, I think, of the 1960s. Would you agree with that, or what is your opinion, Vincent, on Casino Royale?
I really haven't seen it in so long, and it doesn't stick in my memory very firmly. My comment on it is that it's part of his period, which is really very parody oriented, which will continue really up through Annie Hall. That's the great breakthrough there, where he's not simply dealing with parody, but dealing more as in The Front, which is not really a fully Woody Allen film, with more psychological elements and relationship elements in a more seriously probing way. For me, it fits into this parody phase of his career that Mel Brooks never got out of, really, which is kind of an easy way out. It can be funny, it can make comments, it can be satirical, but it's not as rich or rewarding, I think, either cinematically or thematically, than his other work or as work in general could be. That's
Okay. Alex, I know you have called in your book the pre-Annie Hall films, the early funny ones based on the Stardust Memories line. Say from his initial first film, Take the Money and Run, through, I guess it would have been Love and Death was the last film he directed before Annie Hall. Which do you think is the best of those, and why? And do you, what is your take on the public perception of them being the early funny ones?
I think it's probably a tie between Sleeper and Love and Death.
All right, we've gotten Peter Bailey back, and hopefully his audio and video issues are settled. I was Alex. We had talked about the first decade or so of Woody Allen in film, and we had talked about The Front, and we'd also talked about Casino Royale a bit. Alex was talking about what's been labeled the early funny ones, the films from a line from Stardust Memories. Alex, where did you end off?
So you asked which ones are the best from that period. I'd say it's probably a toss-up between Sleeper and Love and Death, albeit for slightly different reasons. With Sleeper, you probably have a bit of a deeper narrative. I don't want to overstate this too much, because there's been a lot written about Sleeper as this supposedly really, really deep comedy. There's all these, great deep underpinnings. There's all this, intellectual heft. I don't necessarily agree with that. It is still, just like Love and Death and the other early films, it's still a gag-driven comedy. However, there's clearly, you know, intelligence underneath it. There's commentary on you know, human behavior and interactions. There's commentary on human values and the sort of things that people, you know, say, for example, are good for you turn out to be bad for you, and vice versa. You have Dan Keaton playing a very interesting character named Luna, who's this kind of I guess upper class literati, but she's in the society that has been pretty much wiped out, so they don't have much of a history to go by. They're essentially starting over again with culture and with art and with I guess political machinations, and you sort of see her, you know, trying to become this poet, and she's, you know, getting up and she's reading all these cliched lines. She clearly cannot write at all. And yet it seems like Woody's comment there is, you know, no matter where you are, even if you're in a kind of post-apocalyptic world, you're going to have these types that, you know, try to do things that are deeper than themselves, and they're going to try to, you know, get beyond themselves, and most of them will fail. You know, you see this quite a bit in the dramas where you have, you know, most of Woody Allen's artists, they happen to be pretty bad artists. You know, Luna in that sense is no exception, and yet you see, you know, her type kind of permeating everything from comedy to drama. So there's that kind of deeper element going for it. As for Love and Death, I'd say it's probably the best acted by far of the early films, and it's also probably the funniest. If you look at, you know, maybe, you know, laughs, you know, per minute, it's probably the most compact in that sense of the gag-driven work that he's done. You see the chemistry between Woody Allen and Diane Keaton play out in very, very subtle terms. I don't simply mean like the big things, like when they're running around or when they're, you know, conspiring to do things and, you know, all these things sort of explode and fly. I mean the much smaller things when, you know, Diane Keaton might very knowingly look at the camera because, you know, she says something funny and she knows it. Or the way that she might look askance at a character. These tiny little touches that, you know, it's really what comedy is about. It's not merely the big stuff that people are laughing at. It's everything else underneath it. It's the kind of stuff that we laugh at in everyday life, the little, you know, quirks that people have and, you know, others are able to point out. She's able to draw attention to herself in that way. And two films are probably the best from that time period for those reasons.
Okay, Peter, Alex and Vincent had been talking about The Front and Casino Royale a bit, and then Alex just, you heard some of his stuff. What are your thoughts on the first decade or so of Woody Allen in film, from the sort of 60s extravaganza films through The Front?
I'd agree completely with Alex that the two that you can still watch are Love and Death. Sleeper, maybe. Funny bits in Sleeper, but I also agree with him that it doesn't feel like the kind of put together plot that you're going to start to get with Annie Hall. Love and Death, you do get that. You do get a sense that he's actually thinking in addition to coming up with gags, and that's where, for me, that's where it starts. If you don't start with Play It Again, Sam, which to me is really the start of it, because he stumbled on this thing about Bogart, and that becomes so important in terms of breaking the fourth wall. We don't have a term for that in movies, but I'll use that one. Which is going to be so crucial to the other movies in Annie Hall, right down to Match Point. These touching of different dimensions in his films that he does kind of offhandedly, because he started with people like Kaufman and other dramatists, Tennessee Williams, who do the same kind of thing. So. Yeah, I agree completely that those are the two, those and Play It Again, Sam, that you start seeing the Woody Allen we know from later emerging.
All right, well, let's end this segment, and then we'll dig into what I called a few years ago the Golden Age, which is starting with Annie Hall and going through about a 15-year run through Husbands and Wives, and we'll do that.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah?
Go ahead.
Still have some things to say about that.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
You have a moment for that.
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of see them as a package. I mean, if you see them in the larger picture of the arc of his work, he's developing himself. This is a pre-phase, if you will, to his mature phase. He's developing his persona. He's developing his cinematic palette, if you will, that I think really was crucial to showing him other ways to make films via Martin Ritt. And we can see various elements of his later work in almost all of these works. In Play It Again, Sam, crucial, like as Peter said, is the element of relationships and also the shiksa complex, if you will, the Jew attracted to the non-Jewish shiksa. We see that come to the fore in Take the Money and Run, which I think is really one of his better films in a lot of ways. I mean, there's just some wonderful gags. I mean, it is a gag-driven film, but really gags. It also brings in the mockumentary element that Alec mentioned that will pop up throughout his work from that point on, and he will deal with the notion of documentary and fiction. And of course, that relates to the way his own life fits into his work. There's a documentary element to almost all his films when he plays in them and when they're about his character to some degree. Then Love and Death, of course, we bring in, the Russian element, and Dostoevsky will play a huge role in his later work, and this, is an obvious play on war and peace. So the intellectual element comes to the fore in this one. And Sleeper, I don't know, there's the gag element, there's the fanciful element that Peter mentioned, which will open up, the realistic frame of his films to open up to more magical realms that we'll get into with his later work. So I see, just bits and pieces, sort of a cut and paste aspect of his earlier work that will then come to fruition, from Annie Hall on.
All right, any final comments then before we move on to the next segment? No? All right. Well, now we'll end this segment, then like as I said, we'll hit the golden age when we return. All right, I want to talk now about what I consider sort of the golden age of Woody Allen. Like many artists, he has a peak, and I think his peak was probably from '77 with the start of Annie Hall, and probably lasted till about 1992 with Husbands and Wives, and in the 15 or so films then, there's really only maybe 2 or 3 films that are really mediocre or less. The rest of them are either very good films, excellent, or, right up there, I think, in the pantheon of American and world cinema. So, obviously, Annie Hall is the one that most people default the Allen film. Let's start with Peter this time. What is your opinion about Annie Hall? Do you agree that with most people that it's his best film, or do you think it was just sort of an entree into better stuff to come?
The only thing that complicates calling it one of his best films is the role that Ralph Rosenblum played in helping him to cut it to a film that actually made a certain amount of sense, as opposed to having, I can't remember, Kierkegaard playing basketball against whoever else, and all that wonderful stuff that was in it, but which Rosenblum helped him cut it down to a film that did make dramatic sense. Does that undermine it as a wonderful film? I don't think so, but it looks as if it was a good thing that Rosenblum was there to work with him on it, because it did turn into an absolutely wonderful film once you get some of that out, but leave some of it in, of the three of them going to visit a party in Brooklyn of his childhood. Those things worked perfectly well. Some of the other stuff seemed to be too far out even for early Woody Allen, and it seems to me a stunningly good film, and a film that said, okay, this guy's here, and he matters.
You mentioned Rosenblum. This was also the period where Woody Allen first started connecting with a lot of other collaborators like Gordon Willis, that Sven Nykvist, some musical soundtrack people that really, I think, amped his films up. Who of his collaborators that started from the Annie Hall period. Who do you think was the most influential in taking him from a gag-driven filmmaker to someone who could make coherent, diegetic sense in his films?
Uh, Certainly, Gordon Willis was very important in terms of improving the visuals of his films. Marshall Brickman, I'm not sure how much we know about what he contributed to Manhattan, but Allen gave him co-credit as screenplay writer. We'll come back to Manhattan because there are issues there that are kind of interesting, but. Those are the two. I mean, all the cinematographers. He works so well with cinematographers and respects them. I happen to be working a little bit on Stanley Kubrick at the moment, and that couldn't be more different in terms of Stanley Kubrick simply wanting to be his own cinematographer and not paying attention to Mehdi or the other cinematographers. This isn't the case with Allen, who respects the cinematographers he has and I think learns from them.
Vincent, how about you? Starting with Annie Hall, what's your thoughts about sort of the metamorphosis of Woody Allen, gag-driven filmmaker of the previous periods, and then into his more mature phase?
Yes, well, again, retrospectively, you have to see that previous work is sort of leading up to and crystallizing in this work, bringing it all together, if you will. As I begin my article in the book on Woody Allen, it's the bringing together of his off-screen and on-screen selves, merging them to some degree, of course, in a creative way and in a flexible way. But it's undeniably and openly referring to his own life. I mean, he was going with Diane Keaton for a number of years. He plays a comic writer in the film, and so on. There are these obvious intersections with his real life that are now unabashedly coming to the fore and contributing to the richness of the film. And then cinematically, again, this is theoretical, but again, I would argue that the front was a learning experience for him as a filmmaker, and he would increasingly orient his work towards long takes, off-screen space. He doesn't do that quite as much in Annie Hall, some of that. And the influences of other filmmakers that would come to the fore, again, more openly, sometimes with Fellini and Bergman, and sometimes more disguisedly. And just, he comes out of the French New Wave, clearly, also, in taking chances and being innovative cinematically. And he had tried that in bits and pieces in the earlier films, and then it comes together. Ralph Rosenblum, being very aware, and in his book talks about his being influenced by the New Wave as well. He had worked on The Pawnbroker and was very crucial to making that as well, the Sidney Lumet film. So, okay, we'll take it from here.
Alex, what are your thoughts about Annie Hall being sort of a transition into the newer phase, the later phase?
Well, to first comment on Peter's words about Ralph Rosenblum, the film has this reputation of originally being this completely unwatchable mess. The editors have said it, Woody Allen has said it, people that have seen it have said it, but at the same time, I've learned in the arts in general, not just in cinema, but whether it comes to writing or painting or whatnot, you can't trust those kinds of judgments most of the time. It's very possible that it was a complete unwatchable mess. It's possible that it was something else altogether. What we do know as facts is this: he was already making films now for over a decade up until that point. He had not a single bad film. They were all, between very good to, perhaps being some of the best pure comedies written to that point. The dramas immediately following Annie Hall were all, just very stellar works. His golden age would last until '92, and he would still have excellent films afterwards. I think the whole period he maybe has had 2 or 3 mediocre films. You had maybe a Midsummer Night's Sex comedy, and then you had the made-for-TV film Don't Drink the Water in the early '90s. So he had a pretty good track record. I find it hard to believe that Annie Hall would have been the complete mess that Woody has said it was, because he also said the same thing about Manhattan. He's also said the same thing about many other films. So I'm not completely sure whether I agree with that. I would obviously, like many people, would love to see it, but whether or not it still exists, nobody knows. So it's hard to make any objective comments about that, except to go by hearsay, and hearsay artistically tends to be very, very poor. As far as Annie Hall itself, it is probably one of my favorite Woody films. I don't think it's his best film. It's probably not even in the top 5, but it is one of my favorites. One of the things that has always been interesting to me is people that tend to get into Woody Allen, say in their teens or their early 20s, they usually do so through a film like Annie Hall. And they tend to be men, and they're men that have had perhaps similar experiences that Alvy has had. They've had maybe these kinds of relationships that maybe were doomed from the start, or relationships that they try to sort of get to the bottom of why they fell apart, just like Woody's character is trying to do. And they start to identify with a character like Alvy. They start seeing his quirks and his flaws in themselves, and they start over-sympathizing with him at the expense of other characters within the film. Now, I consider Alvy to be a pretty manipulative sort of guy. I don't think he's evil. I don't think really a worse person than Annie. And Annie, the irony is that, first of all, he's more intelligent than Annie. He knows more about life. He has more experience. He understands things better on a more visceral level, perhaps on a more intellectual level. Annie, however, she has a very different approach to life. She's less intelligent, but she knows how to live life appropriately. And Alvy is not good for Annie. Annie is not good for Alvy. And you get a sense that the only reason Alvy is with her is just kind of stave off his loneliness. And Annie, she eventually goes off to California. She ends up kind of forging her own life. In the interim, she ends up becoming not necessarily, she doesn't reach any kind of noble ideal. What she ends up doing is she ends up, doing like bit pieces in acting and singing. She ends up going to parties. Maybe she's doing, the cocaine she always wanted to do if it wasn't for Alvy, kind of sneezing on it. But the point is, she doesn't reach any kind of noble ideal, but it works for her. And Alvy doesn't seem to understand this. He doesn't understand that the way that she's living her life absolutely works for her. It does not work for Alvy. And his kind of ruse from the very beginning to kind of, it's a complete manipulative tact. So it's ironic that people sort of go into Woody's films often through Annie Hall, through this kind of over-identification with somebody that in the end is not a very good person. And the fact that Woody Allen was able to construct a person that is not a good person, and yet he's still so likable in another sense, and he's so well sketched, that's a real credit for him. Some of this technique that Woody often employs in his films, where he has characters that are less than stellar individuals, and yet you still put a lot of emotional investment into him. It makes me feel like it's very similar to the sort of thing that happens in Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, where in the end, Alex, when he's kind of forced to kind of go against his inner nature and become a completely different person, a person that is a complete villain up until that point, he becomes a kind of hero. You start to root for him. You start to root for him despite his evils. And again, that's a credit to the strength of the writing that you're able to do that. You, as a human being, you're not supposed to emotionally identify with these utter villains. Not that Alvy is a villain, but the point is, there's this subtle thing going on where, despite all these problems, you still are part of his narrative, and you want to see the best work out for him, despite kind of all the visual evidence right in front of you, saying how wrong you are for wanting that. So I've often found that very interesting about Annie Hall, and I haven't heard many people talk about that angle, but I think it is very much a clue to what happens in later films, especially Manhattan, where you have it's not just like
before you go on, Alex, I want to go sort of the thematic differences throughout the different films, because it seems to me in that period there were what Allen himself called the novels on film, which would have been like Annie Hall, Manhattan, Interiors, Hannah and Her Sisters, Crimes and Misdemeanors, Another Woman, Husbands and Wives, and then there's sort of the one-off films, the Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy, the Broadway Danny Rose, the Radio Days, the Alice Night and Fog, I believe it is.
Shadows
and Fog.
Shadows and Fog.
Shadows and Fog. Night and Fog was the documentary. So let's talk about sort of because Alan seemed to be doing maybe one or two films of each in a row and then go back. He seemed to seesaw back and forth in this era. Let me start with Peter again. He seemed to do these heavier dramatic novels on films, and then he'd do sort of a little funny comedy like Purple Rose or something like that. Do you think that was a conscious choice, or how do you compare those two sort of types of films in that major period?
Well, he's argued since then quite insistently, and I guess I'm convinced by it that you have to make the film you want to make. And sometimes, yes, he's going to go back and forth from comedy to drama, but sometimes there'll be two comedies in a row. I think he really does. His complete indifference to audience really allows him to do that, and I think he has done that quite conscientiously to make sure that he's making the movie he wants to make. We'll talk about the impulse behind that later, I'm sure. It does seem to me that after Interiors, he's gonna is that Midsummer Night's
Sex Comedy. Yeah.
Sex Comedy is next, and
No,
no.
not after Interiors, no.
What are that? Yeah, Manhattan. But
It's like 81, 82.
Okay.
And I'll get into the next film after that.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't want to cut you off there, Peter.
No, I'm fine.
Yeah, I mean, the key film in this group, this first half dozen films or so from Annie Hall on, for me, is Stardust Memories. Again, it to a greater extent, maybe than any film, it brings together again this off-screen and on-screen self. I mean, it's all about this alleged crisis he's going through at this period of having to decide and being pushed between the comedy films that are more successful at the box office and Interiors, which bombed both critically and at the box office. And that film is all about that. It's also very openly an homage to both Bergman and Fellini, which would come back to haunt him in many ways. As one critic most damningly put it, he simply Xeroxes other filmmakers, which is absolutely absurd. He pays homage, as many other filmmakers have done, to good effect. But he's dealing with this issue that I think would continue with him, and I think it is a serious issue, which way he wants to go. He has this comic element, and of course he's brilliant at it. He's one of the great comics of all time, and yet he aspires to be a Bergman and a Fellini. I think that's quite clear. And so he aspires to that, and he tried it with Interiors. It didn't work, seemingly. Maybe Alex again will contradict us on that, but he would eventually, I will argue, this is flash forwarding a little bit, but with Match Point and Cassandra's Dream, he will finally achieve it, to make serious films without himself in it. He has to eliminate himself because he always brings in a comic element. But he was able to make successful, serious films that he's continued to make. I would say Jasmine is another good example of that. Professional Man, I'm not so sure. I know we're jumping forward a little bit here, but I think this is a very real issue in his makeup, the series versus the comic. And in certain films like Crimes and Misdemeanors that we'll get into, Hannah and Her Sisters, combine the two very effectively, I think, which is another way to go. But I think he was ultimately aspiring to be a serious filmmaker and to be taken seriously as a serious filmmaker.
Alex,
Melinda's another example.
Which?
Melinda and Melinda is a good example of him becoming very self-conscious about comic versus tragic, and that's how interested he is in it. Yes.
Alex, your comments on the two different types of films, the novels on film versus the smaller themed films?
I mean, he's always said that he needs a kind of a break and a breather. I mean, uh, I'm not sure to what extent he himself truly believes that the work that he's done is not very worthwhile. But assuming that that is correct and that's what he truly feels, he probably does need a breather from doing something that he purely enjoys to something that is a bit more serious and difficult and just much harder to put together. He kind of dismissed a film like A Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy from the very beginning. He said, I decided to do this like very small thing as a kind of in between. I never really took it seriously, and I mean it in that case at least it shows. Purple Rose of Cairo, I consider it a greater film than simply a comedy. I wouldn't put it in the league of something like sex comedy or some of the early films. I mean, there's strong dramatic undertones. There's a number of very powerful cinematic techniques that didn't appear in the early comedies. But in general, I mean, I would interpret his desire to do some really small films that he just doesn't believe in from the beginning as a means of just, I feel like I have this idea, I could put it down, it would be better probably than most people's execution on this front. So why not do it? And that gives him something to do for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and then he works on something else entirely. But I again, even in some of the Shadows and Fog, which I think he doesn't really think too much of, and most fans I think even they sort of see it as like, oh yeah, he did that weird black and white film in the early '90s. There's many interesting things happening there. There's things visually going on that you don't see in other Woody films. There's things in the writing that he didn't quite do up until Shadows and Fog. There's just a number of really interesting techniques that even in the small films, they're definitely worth watching for that reason, despite Woody's feelings on the matter. I'd consider them somewhere between a breather and something to do that it's just whatever small niche that it fills in the genre, it's still better to be filled by Woody than somebody else. So I think his mentality is why not do it.
So let's talk about qualitatively. In my opinion, I think of films like Manhattan. Interiors, I think, is probably a great film in some ways, maybe a near great film. Stardust Memories, I think, is one of his 3 best films. I put it along with Another Woman and Crimes and Misdemeanors. Hannah and Her Sisters, maybe just a hair below them. Husbands and Wives, I think Radio Days is probably arguably, I think, the greatest pure American comedy ever made. But because it's a comedy, most people, sitting at the grown-ups table, as Woody said. What films in that 15-year period would each of you consider his sort of his classic great works? Let's start with Vincent this time.
Okay, I'm going to be a little bit of a rebel here, but coming from the academic perspective, we tend to, well, I shouldn't overgeneralize here, but we tend to be not as concerned with quality, as you will, about the film. We're looking for what's interesting in it from various perspectives. And certainly on a personal level, we have our own gut reaction. We like this film, we don't like this film. But it gets into subjectivity, really. Certainly you can get a consensus of critics who say this is the best and that's the best. But for me, it's more important, what are the elements? If we start out with the notion that Woody Allen is an important artist and filmmaker, then what are the elements that go into making that? And it's less important which film is better than another.
Well, Vincent, can I just...
Let me go through some of these films. As I mentioned, Stardust Memories in terms of this documentary aspect in relation to Woody Allen himself. Then we have, of course, Zelig, which is his great mockumentary, which also deals with elements of Woody Allen. The guy who allegedly is copying other people, and what it's about, a guy literally becomes other people, which then brings in the supernatural, magical element that I'm going to be talking about at other points. This difference between magic, which he began as a magician and appears as a magician in various films, magic in the sense that is phony and the magical qualities in his films, which are supernatural, but of course are only magical because of the magic of cinema, which of course is to him a form of religion, if you will. You could look at the various elements in these different films. Purple Rose of Cairo is a magical film. It's about the magic of cinema. And on its own terms, it is supernatural and magical. But of course, it's only allowed to be that because of the magic of cinema. And her sisters, much more novelistic, Crimes and Misdemeanors, much more intellectual, dealing with elements of guilt, which I'm going to bring up in relation to my Jewish angle that I'm taking on this. As we know, Jews are obsessed with guilt, or we wouldn't have Yom Kippur as our highest holy day. But we could go back to Take the Money and Run, which is very much about guilt. It's about a guy who's continually in prison, is a criminal, is dealing with guilt and innocence, and then his parents who feel guilty about him as their son, and who are wearing Groucho Marx masks, which identifies them as Jewish, even though they're trying to cover up their identity. Anyway, that brings in the Jewish element, and of course permeates many of his films as well. So I'm kind of not answering your question there, but maybe giving a different angle to how Woody Allen's work can be perceived.
Well, I wanted to ask you though, because you made this, you stated about starting with the assumption that Woody was a great filmmaker, but clearly to make that assumption, you have to make an objective assessment of him, because no one really, we wouldn't be doing the show about, say, a Poverty Row filmmaker from the 1930s, 50 westerns in a 5-year period. So, I mean, when you talk about being interested, we are interested in Woody Allen because he is a quality filmmaker. Right. I mean, you can't get away from that.
Again, it becomes subjective, and also for all of us who have lived through watching films at various times and various periods of our lives, we know that films have lives of their own, and we experience them differently at different times. They are experienced differently because the times have changed. So it's very hit and miss and very flawed, I think, to try to discover, maybe in retrospect, going back, how do these films hold up? But that's another question. How well does a film hold up compared to how important it was at its time? So it's a very problematic issue to talk about what is a great film, what is a better film. For instance, I just saw Stardust Memories, which I always regarded as one of his better films. I showed it in a class because I remembered it as one of my great films. I showed it in class. I found it insufferably self-indulgent, which critics at the time pointed out. It had its moments, it had its very funny moments, but I now do not regard Stardust Memories as one of his great films anymore. I'm afraid to go back and see Annie Hall if I have a different attitude about that. Even Crimes and Misdemeanors, I'm afraid to go back and see it. So my attitude about films has changed so radically over time. But even if I have that feeling, I could still say Stardust Memories is an important film. But even if I don't regard it any more personally as such a great film. So do you see my issue there? But that's just my issue. You guys can now talk about which are his greatest films.
Okay, Peter, how about your opinion on the top films of that peak era?
I liked your list very much. I wouldn't disagree with much of it at all. Stardust Memories, if it gives me problems at all, it's if I'm going to teach it, do I have to also teach 8½? That is the movie that I can't watch, but Stardust Memories is so important in terms of the ideas that it introduces about his relation, that filmmaker's relationship to the audience. I love the fact that at the end you have no idea who's talking to whom. Are they actors, or is it Woody Allen? The way he handles that is so perfect. Purple Rose may be my sense of his most compact and beautifully structured film. Husbands and Wives is part of the culture of its time, but the use of the handheld camera to make that work is wonderful. Crimes and Misdemeanors, I think, is a great film. I don't agree with him that he should have cut out the cliff part. I think those are balanced perfectly in that movie. That okay, go make Match Point. You will make Match Point, and that will be wonderful in its own way. That movie was made to have the crimes and the misdemeanors, and the Alan character lives in the realm of misdemeanors, and that can't be changed. I just thought that was brilliantly put together. That he could do all that in an hour and a half is just stunning. So those and Radio Days, I like your description. What a great comedy that is. It really is.
And I think it's an improvement on Amarcord. It actually, and I want to get into Woody's repetition throughout his own films and other filmmakers in a moment here. But if you have any final comments, then I'll ask Alex for his opinion on the.
Go ahead, Alex.
Alex, go ahead.
Well, just first a question for Peter. I read one of your books, The Reluctant Film Art, maybe about a year ago. I'm not sure if it was you or somebody else, but did you revise your opinion of Stardust Memories? Because from what I recall, I think you had a fairly ambiguous take on the film, but then again, that was well over a decade ago.
The only reservation I think I had is that the movie is so complicated to try to explain to somebody else. Other than that, given the fact that I think I do have an understanding of it for my own purposes, I think it's wonderful and great, but it's been certainly hard to sell it to students. Vincent's experience and mine, I think, are the same, that they just don't know where they are, and they don't know whether there's debates or not, for the reasons that I think you summed up very nicely, Alex, that there always is a level of irony about his characters. He's had that from the beginning. And so, if I have a reservation, it's only that the complexity of it. Otherwise, I think it's a stunning movie.
If I could chime in here, and to counter what I said about not wanting to go into what are his great films or not, I would simply say what are my favorite films from a personal perspective. And I think I agree with Peter that Radio Days is just a wonderful film. I show it in my classes all the time. It's inexhaustible. I love it as much today as I did last time. And so do the students. They applaud at the end of that film. I think also an underrated film, which I like very much, is Alice. I like Alice very much. Supernatural films, again, a magical film. It's about the magical potential in life that cinema can make real. And again, Mia Farrow is wonderful in it as the Schlemielish type character. We can get into that as well. Woody Allen as the Schlemiel, and then as surrogate Schlemiels. So there's a whole legion of them. And I would argue that Mia Farrow played Woody Allen type in films that he doesn't appear in. So those are two of my favorites. Radio Days and Alice. And Shadows and Fog, by the way, I agree with Alex, is an underrated film. And certainly if you look at it from a Jewish perspective, and as a prefiguring or foreshadowing, so to speak, of the scandal, because here we have Woody Allen playing a guy who's falsely accused of being a serial killer, falsely accused, but has to run for his life to avoid it. And again, we have magic that comes in there as well. So yes, I think that's an underrated film.
Okay, Alex, your comments on the Golden Age films?
Well, before I get into the films, I have a couple of general comments. I was surprised, Vincent, that you said that as an academic and perhaps even as a film goer, your number one concern is not really evaluation. You don't really look at things from that perspective. But you did mention, for example, that The Front, was a really good, subtle film. I mean, that takes some level of objective argumentation. If you think of something as in any way nuanced, you have to be able to bring up evidence, meaning things that are actually within the film and not things that you imagine. They're actually there. So when it comes to criticism, I do consider evaluation to be key, and that's because you can take evaluation and branch off of that into basically a multiplicity of directions. And ultimately, when you look at the works of art that have survived over time, with some exceptions and some lapses, they do tend to be better than bad. That's not the case, obviously, if you look at in contemporary times, whether it's contemporary Rome or contemporary America or contemporary, Greece, if you were around in, 500 BC. But when you look at things in the long view, the works that survive, they do tend to be good. Critics are able to understand what this good is and perhaps prop them up. That's going to allow culture to sort of be affected and afflicted by these works in a positive sense much more quickly. I mean, think of how different literature would have been if a book like Moby Dick, instead of being allowed to permeate culture in 1920 or 1930, if it was allowed to do so in 1851 when it was first published. If the kind of ignorance that surrounded its publication wasn't around, you probably wouldn't have had the kind of bad experiments in form and the kind of silly needs that authors felt in the 1910s or 1920s that are now more or less forgotten, because you had that kind of experimentation already going on, and it was unsuccessfully. That could have been a model. I very much think that a critic's role is therefore to prop these models up and to show exactly where they can teach the rest of the world in terms of art and other things, so that culture could keep plugging along and moving forward. That said, I consider the best films of the time period to probably be Manhattan. Stardust Memories would be my #1 film from the time period. Another Woman, Crimes and Misdemeanors, Hannah and her sisters, Husbands and Wives. Although I think you could make also really good arguments, as Dan said, for Radio Days. I also consider it probably the best pure comedy, because it's not just a comedy. It's not so much that it has these dramatic underpinnings, although it does. It's much more so the fact that as a narrative, everything has a kind of complete closure, and it's a very satisfying closure. It's not the closure that you would get necessarily in a really dramatic film, but it's closure that makes absolute sense for this kind of comedy. To, I guess, comment on what was said about Stardust Memories, I think it's like 92 minutes long, compared to Fellini's 8.5. It's much more compact. It's not compact in the sense that Woody decided to compress things and therefore lost a lot. It's compact in the sense that everything that a film should not have, he kind of completely excised. Everything that should be within it, he left. There's so many scenes that I was actually watching some scenes from it last night. There's so many things in it that just stand out as the best parts of cinema that I've seen, from anybody. There's, for example, the Dory character, who appears in at least 3 or 4 really magnificent scenes in the film. One is where she finally goes into the mental hospital, and you have a close-up of her for about 1.5 minutes, and she's in between. She's flirting with Sandy, who's played by Woody Allen. She's sort of teasing him. She's kind of criticizing herself. She's criticizing him, and as she's doing this, you see a teardrop forming, and you see these kinds of fractured jump cuts, and you get the sense after literally just 1.5 minutes of just seeing this is exactly what a psychotic must feel like, and this is exactly what psychosis must look like. And most of the film, she's not in a psychotic state. Yes, she might be a little bit off, she might be, in a bad mood, but for the most part, you don't get that. You know that she's psychotic merely because it's said and merely because the scene appears. Think of the kind of depth of characterization that occurs, that despite the fact that her defining feature is never a thing that is always in her face in the film, it is still a thing that you know to be her defining feature on account of just 1 or 2 scenes that are just so kind of magnificently done, that being one of them. You have other ones where she, flies into a jealous rage, or she thinks that Woody is flirting with her, I think it's 14 or 15-year-old cousin, as the wallpaper in his apartment changes to reflect her jealousy. It's these little subtle twinges that not only characterize her but also characterize him, because this is sensibly much of this is happening in his own mind. Or you have the other part of Dory where Woody Allen is introducing her as the happiest moment in his life, and he's imagining the spring day, and he's putting on a Louis Armstrong record, and you don't see Woody's face after the camera turns to her, and yet you know exactly what Woody is thinking and feeling and the kinds of faces that he must be making at her. and you know exactly what he's doing, despite the fact that the camera stays only on her face. Again, just think of the level of sophistication that this requires. You do not know what's happening to another character, and yet you absolutely do, without even having this kind of direct reference to him. You know, and these are just a couple of examples, but if you literally go scene by scene, every single scene has so many layers. Like, there's just so many things that could be said for, on top of the fact that there is a coherent narrative. You know, people do think of it as complicated, and when I first saw it was when I was 19 or 20 years old. I did think it was too complicated, but then again, it was 19 or 20. You know, watching it now as a I guess a bit more of a grown adult, I find it fairly easy to follow. And I think, you know, if you watch it just, you know, 2 or 3 times, these things do sort of unfold much more quickly than you think you would upon a first viewing. But again, you know, just going by scene, there's so many things that could be discussed on a purely, you know, visual level or purely writerly level. There's so many lines that are so wise and just say so many things about art and say so many things about human interaction. And there's also a lot to be said about the fact that the critics that did respond to it, that sort of, you know, took at face value that Sandy Bates is Woody Allen. Not only is it just factually wrong on many levels, it's also, more importantly, it's just completely irrelevant. You know, you look at the film itself and you judge on those merits. But even so, you know, Sandy Bates is not merely a filmmaker that is unhappy with his lot in life, is unhappy with his fans, and therefore this is why he turns everybody around him into these grotesque creatures. The reason why all these people keep coming for him and keep wanting a piece of him, it's not simply because he's famous. It's not simply because he has money, although that's what most people assume. He's also, unlike them, a very whole person. He is a complete person. He is intelligent. He's talented. He knows how to live life. Despite the fact that he has these neuroses on the surface level, he is obviously, in his conversations with others, he understands himself far better than everybody around him. He knows how to live life far better. And then at the very end of the film, you know, when this inner film ends and the outer film sort of comes to its own close, all these characters that were going through all these issues and they had all this hatred for Sandy, all these problems, they just completely dissolve. And they dissolve basically by the ennobling quality of art. And as everything fades and he sort of looks into this screen, you know, this is exactly what he must be thinking. You know, Sandy Bates is not merely the neurotic within the beginning of the film. He's also the person that created the film. He's also the person at the very end. Does that not count for anything? How is this very obvious ploy missed by so many viewers and critics? It just completely is baffling to me.
Well, Alex, let me end this segment about the golden age with getting back to Vincent talking about biography, because really this golden age ended with the last film that I consider part of his golden age, which would have been Husbands and Wives, and that was widely misinterpreted as, you know, part of the Soon Yi and the personal scandal. So let's talk. Let me start with Vincent, since he brought it up, and he would seem to be the most eager to talk about it. Let's talk about the scandal that ended sort of that in the early 90s there with Mia and Soon Yi, and then the allegations of abuse, and then how that was either correctly or incorrectly interpreted or interpolated into reviews for Husbands and Wives. So Vincent, if you want to talk about the scandal in Husbands and Wives.
Yes, well, you know, I don't see how you can fail to see it in some relationship to what was really going on. Again, how relevant that is to interpreting it from a cinematic standpoint, from an artistic standpoint. You know, my point about evaluation is not that one shouldn't evaluate. One can't help but evaluate. And as an academic, one has one personal feelings. One tries to be more objective in various other ways. One just tried to problematize the notion of evaluation. I mean, look at I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think it's important to clarify this notion. I mean, look at the top 10 films that Screen Journal has come out with every 10 years. It gyrates quite a bit from year to year, and now Vertigo is allegedly, you know, is the greatest film of all time. What does that mean? I mean, that's kind of meaningless. And Woody Allen himself, who hates the Academy Awards, right, the greatest film of the year, you know, that sort of stuff, I think, is superficial and not worth really taking that seriously. Again, we change our opinions about films from year to year, and even across centuries. Look at how critics have raised certain artists to the pinnacle of the pantheon one century, and then the next they're down at the bottom again. I mean, that sort of thing is irrelevant. We look at what's interesting at a certain moment, and at another moment, it may not be so interesting again. Okay, husbands and wives. Again, after that, one started to look back at his earlier films to seemingly be foreshadowings of this event, reality, the Sunni scandal. And you went back to Manhattan. My wife, as I said, this created a great rift in our attitude about Woody Allen. She loved him up till that point. She absolutely hates him now, and many other people do. Not only women, but I think it tilts towards women. You go back to Manhattan, where he's having an affair with a 17-year-old girl. You go back to a short story that he wrote in the early 1980s, where he marries a woman and admits really who loved both with her and her daughter. Okay, there are elements of this. This does not mean that Woody Allen is a pedophile or he's actually engaged in these matters, but it does sort of indicate, maybe, as we all do, we all have fantasies, that we may not be the greatest, but we keep them from occurring in reality. Anyway, we'll maybe go to this morality element, which will increasingly concern him. The notion of morality in the world, the morality of his characters, justice, and so on. But I mean, here he is again having an affair with a younger girl, which will appear again in Irrational Man. And it's a professor again who's having an affair. Now you can take that as a which he's done. But you could also see it as somehow relating in some way to his own life. And I think you're missing out on something if you don't do that. That doesn't mean that's the only thing to look at. There's a universal aspect to his work. There's a personal aspect to his work, and we do that with all the great artists. We look at the universal aspect, we look at the personal aspect. And in Woody Allen, it cries out to be considered in all of his films, even when he's not in them. In what way is he in some way commenting on his own engagement with the world and with cinema? So that really didn't deal so much with husbands and wives, but we'll take it from there.
So, Vincent, I have a question. When you say that your wife was a fan of Woody Allen and then she no longer was that specifically a reaction to what? Was it the Sunni scandal, or was it the sex abuse allegations?
No, it was the Sunni scandal. The other, just he couldn't go any further down in her estimation anyway.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to get too off track here, but just to comment on what was said. Specifically with you can't use the word pedophilia in relation to Woody Allen unless you specifically are referring to the sex abuse allegations. I mean, it's not pedophilia to date a 17-year-old. That's legal, I think, in most states, and it's legal in New York. And she was not 17 at the time. I think she was either 19 or 21, depending on what age is believed. She herself does not really know her own age either. He definitely has a history of dating younger women. There was a 17-year-old that he dated that she came out and said, I dated Woody Allen. We had a very nice relationship, and then it ended. He wanted to date Marilyn Hemingway. So he clearly does have this attraction on some level to younger women, but that's the point. They are younger women. We're not talking about kids. Say what you will about marrying the stepdaughter of your girlfriend. It's clearly an idiotic move, and it's a very selfish move. But it's not a sociopathic move of sex abuse, which is the main thing that he was charged with. And I think the biggest thing that's kind of hovering over him. But there's this very quick conflation between the two. It doesn't make any sense to me. Me being 28 years old, I find the idea of dating even an 18-year-old to be disgusting, because I know what I was at 18, and that I was very childlike. So I can't get over that. But it would not be a pedophilic act. It would not be a sociopathic act. It would just be a sexually immature act. And you see this all the time. You see guys in their 30s and where he's cruising through college campuses that want to, pick up, 19-year-old girls to fuck, but it's not sociopathy. It's just personal maturity. They're just fucking losers. And Woody Allen maybe in that portion of his life might be a bit of a loser, but anything more than that, I think is too much of a conflation.
I certainly wasn't accusing him of that. In his films, of course, if a professor has an affair with a younger student, that's another matter.
Peter, let's get back to it. I wanted to just get your thoughts on the husbands and wives and anything about the scandal possibly being conflated. Peter.
I tend to stay away from the thing I tell my students you cannot do is you can recognize autobiographical elements. You cannot extrapolate from autobiographical elements to autobiography. I don't know what parts of it were particularly relevant to the actual circumstances. I do think it's interesting that the end has Woody Allen, the Woody Allen character's name, I'm not remembering at the moment, all by himself saying, "Is this over? Can I go now?" The ending of the movie is completely ragged because the movie is ragged, and it's suggesting that there are times in life when things get ragged, and if you tried to put a nice, neat bow on it, it would be completely dishonest. So it does seem to me a film that hits at the hard parts of all of us that we don't want to admit, but they're certainly there, and for that reason, I think it's a very effective film. However we see it in relationship to actual events.
Okay.
I would add that it's crucial, again, in Allen's work, that critics saw it as reflecting what was going on in his life, because we can't reiterate too much, Woody Allen is continually using his life as creative inspiration for his work. So whether he agrees with the fact that he's guilty or not, which I don't think he agrees with, certainly from his statements, he's still using it as fodder for his work. If you will, as the unfairly wrongness of it, which again, if we go back to Shadows and Fogs, was all about somebody being falsely accused, as a Jew, importantly as well, and I think that's important. And that's part of his autobiography, but he's universalizing it in terms of the Jewish predicament, the element of guilt, which again will obsess him in his future work.
Okay. Any final comments from any of you on this? And as I want to move on to the post, the last, say, quarter century or so. No?
I'm fine.
Okay. So we'll do that. We'll talk about Woody Allen from Husbands and Wives till the current, and we'll do that in just a moment.